Sorry, I was just trying to retrieve some documents.
Hello, good night.
Good night.
Welcome to Legalize this 11th day of May, 2025, Mother's Day. And tonight we are going to look at mental health and the law. And we have a panel. We have a panel of 4 persons, two from the medical field, 2 from the legal field, in addition to my co-host and myself. Today also marks Mother's Day, and we also want to dedicate this program to the mothers around the world. However, before we go into the program, we just want to recognize the sponsors of this program: Gel Professional Solutions, Inc., Gem FM carrying this program on FM radio from Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Welcome back. So, as I said, today's Mother's Day. So we want to dedicate this program to the mothers. And we just want to play a very special tune by a young Grenadian. A very special tune by a young Grenadian. And hopefully this will set the tone for tonight's program.
Bring them up. Mama, babe. Say from a king to a queen. I say come let me reap the rewards of your labor. Go on if you dream. This one's for you, my babe. This one is for my babe. You play your part and you still playing your part. Yes, I love you from my heart, boy. My babe, I so love your part. But wait till you depart. You said this song's from my heart. Say from a king to a queen. I say come let me reap the rewards of your labor. Go on if you dream. I know you are the queen of the kingdom. You never forsake none of we. And the dream is to work so hard and make my mother happy. This song's for you, mommy. you crumb me. Before I want me for scrum, before I voice me for song, you are the one that hold me. You are the roots that tell me that dumb. Well, my temper was your concern. Up to now it's still your concern. And all when things get out of hand, you taught me to be the bigger man. Walk light, talk less, stay humble. Keep your eyes on the prize, young man. These were the words that set the platform and helped turn me into that. 12 years old, I remember wiping tears from your eyes. You didn't have a dime. I said the next time you cry, it has to be tears of this one is for my baby. You play your part and you still playing your part. Yes, I love you from my heart, boy. My baby, last son, love your bad. Won't wait till you depart. Say this one's from my heart. Say from a king to a queen. I say come let me reap the rewards of your labor. Go on if you dream. I know you are the queen of the kingdom. You never forsake none of we. Man, the dream is to work so hard and make my mother happy. This one's for you, my man. Now to all the mothers out there, I salute you with a fanfare. On your knees every morning, pumping the blessings in there. Not once I saw you in fear. You were the shield that tell me in check. True definition of a mom. You great, stand and take a bow. Hooray, confetti start come out just for you, mom. It's a celebration and you know. And the blueprint to this lies in my hand. Pen to paper. I know you are the engineer, been driving all of us. Now I'm saluting on behalf of all. This one is for my baby. Na 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 na. This one is for my baby. All the queens. Hey, I say come let me reap, let me reap, let me reap the rewards of your labor. Say from a king to a queen. I say come let me reap the rewards of your labor. Go on live your dream. This one's for you, mommy. This one is for mommy. 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 This one is for mommy. Yes, you play your part, and you still playing your part, boy. Hey, this one is for mommy. Oh, oh. Feel it in the soul. Oh, na 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 na. This one is for my baby and all the mothers around the world on Mother's Day. It's a special greeting to you, mothers around the world. Mother's Day. Hope you have yourself a blessed day. And may the Father continue to bless all the mothers. I say, hey, hey, mamma, hey, hey, mamma, hey, hey, mama, 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 this one's for you, mama. This one is for my baby. You play your part and you still play.
Yes, thanks. That was Grenadian artist, goes by the name of Dash. And of course, one thing we know for certain here is that each and every one of us has a mother. She may not be around now, but we all have a mother who was critical in each and every one of us being who we are. So, and those of you who are mothers know the stress that mothers experience. So we have with us tonight, of course, we have Aisha is the co-host. We have Dr. Nixon. We have Mistress Deshane Gutierrez Lopez. We have Miss Michelle Russel, and of course we have Ruggles Ferguson KC. I don't know. We get enough feedback from someone's system. I don't know. So yes, thank you all for being here. And I don't know if we can get any. If I just want to invite opening remarks from. If we can start with Ms. Russell. I know you have to leave after an hour, and we would still much appreciate having you here. Ms. Russell is a lawyer, attorney at law, and expertise is in the field of employment law. Of course, she does other areas of law, but she's an expert in the field of employment law, and she's very passionate about mental health issues. So, Ms. Russell?
Hi, good evening.
Yes.
Thanks for having me. A pleasure to be here. I'm always happy to be part of any forum that makes mental health the focus. Is there some static or feedback from?
Yes. A mental consultant who it's coming from?
I'm wondering if it's me because
You on what?
My camera keeps going off, so I don't know if it's mine.
Okay. Yes. See if you. I don't know if muted will assist. I bet you can just help sort it out.
I could try again. Is there still the static, or is it better? Okay. All right. Well, I'll start again. And I'll say that it's always a pleasure to be part of any forum that is discussing mental health. I personally do not believe that we put enough emphasis and focus on it. We are primarily trained to be intellectual beings, and we believe that if you can follow your intellect, it can solve all problems, but the intellect is certainly only one part of the brain, and it's not enough. And the reality is that it's generally our emotions or our emotional or mental health that will determine our ability to survive stressors, to manage any kind of workplace stress, home stress, and just generally challenges in life. I'm a big believer in the fact that life has seasons, and an expectation of only good and no bad is very unrealistic. And I essentially do not support any teaching that tries to suggest you can escape bad. Life is essentially balanced. So if you're a Christian, the Bible itself says, for every under the sun, there's a season for everything. A time to laugh, a time to cry. When you look at Buddhism, they talk about the fact that nothing stays the same. Everything is always changing. When we look in the Asian religions, they talk about yin and yang. So the point is, the reality is that there will always be a challenge that comes in life. And if we're not willing to educate people on how to manage both or all seasons of life and only how to deal with the good, that is why people tend to crumble under a lot of pressure or continuing pressure. So I really do believe we need to spend more time focusing on teaching people how to manage varying seasons and challenges in their life. I'll stop there.
Okay. Deshane? Good night. Deshane is a clinical psychologist. She's currently in the Cayman Islands, but she practices also out of Belize.
Good night. Thank you guys for having me. Miss Michelle, you had a beautiful opening remarks about mental health in terms of how well-rounded we need to be when we speak about mental health. Oftentimes, so I also provide employee assistance programs for organizations for that same reason, right? Oftentimes people think about mental health, we think about mental illness. We think about the challenges that people face. We think about persons that are unable to go to work. We think about persons that are unable to contribute to society. But mental health is more than just the illnesses. It's not just depression and anxiety. It's also about our mental well-being. And really and truly, we will have to look at it holistically. Our education, our social functioning, our environment, our health, our spirituality, all of those plays a crucial role in terms of how do we manage society. How do we become productive citizens of society? We have to be able to factor in all of those different aspects. And then each of us have our own historical component, right? We have to think about the generational trauma that we also carry, the communities that we come from. All of that come together, and that impacts us on a daily basis. So we may have mental illness in our family, but depending on the environment that we have, the stressors that we have, they may not manifest. So it may be more dormant. But as we age in life, different things may occur, and we may say, well, I spent 10, 15 years and I could handle the traumas that I had, and now I'm unable to manage. Like, I feel like I can't function as good as I used to, even though before you felt like you could handle a lot of stress. And you question yourself, is something wrong with me now? It's not really that something is wrong with you. It's that the skills that you had developed over the years is no longer meeting where you are at this particular point. So it's learning new skills and strategies in terms of how are you able to cope now with what is happening. So I will start off with that part. So I want to thank you guys for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, so we'll come back to you in a while, but Dr. Nixon, you are muted. You need to unmute. You need to, yes.
So my muting is going on. My muting is going on, and my camera's been going on and off on their own. I'm sorry. So good evening again, everyone, and happy Mother's Day to everyone who's listening in as a mother. So I think my two predecessors have given a very good overview of mental health, and as a physician, a lot of us tend to focus a lot on mental illness. And even in managing other illnesses in our patients, we tend not to look at the mental component of that may contribute to their physical illness. And that's a big problem. And since Mr. Layne mentioned the whole issue of Mother's Day, and I think it's important that we look at women's health and women's wellness, and especially their mental wellness, for whatever idiosyncrasies they bear within, among their societal roles. I want to bring up the whole issue of who was mentioned, Miss Louise Langdon Little, who was a man who was probably one of the most famous person we have known who suffered mental illness within the context of racism, within the context of sexism, within the context of poor mental health laws, within the context of people not really caring, within the context of putting people away once they had a mental illness, within the context of absence of appropriate social services. This is a woman who left Grenada, intelligent woman, worked together with Marcus Garvey in the United Thing for Africa, I don't remember, UNIA, and who worked at a high level, had a lot of kids, had shown, according to the reports, because there is a lot of controversy as to what exactly did she have. Was she committed to a mental health facility as a punishment? Was it incarceration in truth and in fact? And only the laws then will determine, and who makes the decision can determine. So here's a woman who had a lot of stresses in her life. She had probably 8 children within a very short period of time, lost her husband, was booted by a partner who got her pregnant and left her, had become an Adventist, had faced a lot of stresses in the community, being looked upon as a revolutionary. That's what would have been then. This is early 30s, plus facing the challenges, the economic challenges of the Great Depression of the 30s. This is in the 30s. And she's sent to jail for, she's committed to a mental hospital because of postpartum depression, some says. But there's also a report that she had what they called dementia precox, which is really schizophrenia today. So what was it really? Was she given, was she treated, was she diagnosed appropriately? Are we diagnosing correctly? Did she have to be in the system for so long? Are we making sure that we have systems that can treat? Are there medications? And all the other things that come in that will, if we had appropriate mental health laws, they will determine that. Do we have people who are capable of taking care of people who suffer from mental unwellness to get them back into society? Because the objective of treatment in countries, in societies where mental illness is seen as another form of illness, is being able to put people back into their regular life as far as that is possible. If I were diabetic and my sugar got uncontrolled and I had to go to hospital, would you control my sugar? Would you send me home and say, stay home until your sugar is controlled? Or would you leave me in the hospital for 6 months? So Louise Little lost all these years of her life for whatever reason, whether it was fair or unfair. Was it fair, however, that she should stay in there, be given a diagnosis, and by the time she's out of jail, she's lost almost probably half of her life just being incarcerated, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm taking this is Sonia Nixon, being committed to a mental health facility, which today she would not have had to stay for all the time. And so therefore we have to consider. Yes. So I just come, let me finish. So therefore we have to consider when we set up our own mental health services that we do not make the persons victim of their own diseases, that the health services are appropriately structured to ensure that they can get in, get treated, get out, and reinstate their lives and their family lives.
Right. I was saying, of course, the person you spoke of, Louise
Was the mother.
Little,
Okay.
was the mother of Malcolm X, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yes, before we go to Mr. Ferguson, when we come back, we just, after Mr. Ferguson and Aisha, we just want to be clear as to what we speaking of when we speak of mental health and mental health issues and so on. So we had a lawyer and two medical persons, and we now have the King's Counsel who actually did a lot of work. Sonia, can you mute, please? Who actually did a lot of work in the quest for mental health reform in Grenada. We still have a Mental Health Hospitals Act, so that tells you the emphasis is on confinement. And that act goes back to 1895. So, Mr. Ferguson, you're muted still. You're muted. You have to unmute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. And good evening to listeners and to all the guests on the program. And let me take this opportunity to also wish all mothers out there continuing happy Mother's Day celebrations. And for all those who are not just biological mothers, but those who see after our children, to wish you happy Mother's Day on this special day. Yes, the starting point on mental health. Let me commend on the choice of program for this evening, and also the choice of guests not just from Grenada, but from outside, because this is a very important area that needs advocates if you have to realize any meaningful change. And I can speak from my own experience, as you mentioned before. In fact, I've been involved in between 2004, 2005, and 2010. I was involved in an initiative to introduce new legislation concerning mental health, and to replace essentially what you referred to as the Mental Hospitals Act, which is all archaic, offensive in its language. In fact, I was shocked when I interfaced with that act, considering then we were looking at it over 100 years after. But that this 1895 Act, more than or approximately 130 years ago, is the act that still guides us to this very day. And notwithstanding the initiatives taken, led by PAHO in 2004, 2005, to introduce a new culture when it comes to the interface and dealing with mental health patients. And so I was asked to assist in the drafting new legislation, and it was modeled after Jamaica. Jamaica at the time was the country seen to be advanced, certainly more advanced than the OECS and other islands. The draft went to PAHO. About 3 years later, they sent it back. They did their own internal reviews, and there was a final draft submitted for consultation. And I was asked to do the consultations regarding the bill. And those consultations were extensive throughout the length of Grenada and Carriacou. I don't think, I was trying to recall whether we had gone to Petit Martinique, but I know Carriacou for certainly. And those consultations were among the public generally, police officers, nurses, all those involved in mental health in Grenada. And what I remember, and I've told this story several times, I think in Miami at a conference, and I was asked sometime in 2010, to submit the report urgently, because it was really required urgently. Things are on the ball. And I remember saying, let me just deal with this report once and for all, so I wouldn't have to be troubled with it when I returned to Grenada. So I stayed up the entire night, and finalized the report and sent it out 8 o'clock the following morning. And that was the last I heard about mental health and initiatives regarding mental health. After that, absolutely nothing was done. The report is in, and the problem that we all suffer, even when we have the best of intentions, is to move from ideas to implementation. And just to say that that new initiative, which started in 2004, 2005, to amend the legislation, the old legislation, and introduce modern legislation that focused not on custody, because the Mental Hospitals Act focuses on custody. The new act would focus on prevention and the use of community health care, primary health care, as once promoted in Grenada, to monitor, set up a database and monitor mental health patients in the communities. That was essentially the focus, and to ensure that the mental health patients, that new draft legislation takes into account the human rights and constitutional rights of mental health patients. The Constitution provides fundamental rights and freedoms, not just for everybody except mental patients. It includes, as part of the citizenry, mental patients. And so part of the focus of that act. And I mean, just to give a snippet of the Mental Hospitals Act, when I faced it then, I did several programs, media programs on it. The act starts off, and this is an act as we speak now on the 11th of May 2025. This is the act in force in Grenada. And the short title says, it is an act to provide for the custody of lunatics. That's the language, and the lunatics used throughout the act. Who is a lunatic? The interpretation section, section 2 of the act, speaks to a lunatic. Say lunatic includes any idiot and any other person of unsound mind. And it goes on to speak about criminal lunatic. You have all kind of categories of lunatic. Criminal lunatic. You have a pauper lunatic, means any lunatic who is found wandering at large, who is not under proper care and not under proper control, or who is likely to commit a crime. Now, when you have that kind of language, speaking about referring to human beings who are basically ill, like others, as lunatics and idiots, then what do we expect our population to how do you expect our population to view them? So, but I'll stop here. But I mean, that is the context of my involvement some many years ago, and I actually saw one of the retirees from the hospital, mental hospital, very senior nurse there, and who was lamenting on it because she actually accompanied me to several of the consultations. So I'll stop here for now. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to thank all of our guests for agreeing to appear on the show. I'm very excited to have these discussions. For me, mental health and wellness is something that, although I've been fully aware of it for pretty much my existence since maybe Form 1, now that I am in a stage whereby I'm an attorney at law and I recognize that mental health and well-being is something that we do not generally speak of. It is something that is in our society on a whole, it's hushed. You know, if something happens, somebody's mental health has failed or they go into a crisis, for example, we talk about it, we comment and say, we should be there for each other. But then everything falls at the wayside after a certain amount of time. And so I think that this topic is very timely, especially considering that May is Mental Health Awareness Month that is celebrated in the, recognized in the US particularly. And I think it is very fitting. So I'm excited to speak with our guests this evening in regards to this.
Yes. So I don't know if the medical people could give us from their standpoint what would you define in the modern context, of course, as mental health? And when you say they have mental health issues, because I was just checking on the internet, and in fact, I was telling Dr. Nixon before we came on, they said about 1 billion people, 1 billion people worldwide have some form of mental health issue, some form of mental health disorder. So obviously, we are any person could experience it, and maybe we all experience it at some time in our life. So I don't know if Dr. Nixon or Deshane, any one of you want to come in on that? So at least we have an idea what we speak about.
Okay, so I'll go ahead.
Host Gutierrez.
So thank you. When we talk about mental health, we're actually talking about a person's entire well-being. I think as you asked that question, what came to my mind was the fact that when we talk about mental health, people oftentimes think about mental illness. So, for example, the amount of persons that may have depression, anxiety, substance use, etc., that's automatically what we think about when we think about mental health. And I guess that what makes it difficult for a person to talk about it, because we only see the challenges that they face. Mental health is our well-being, and each of us has mental health. And that encompasses our academic, our social, like I mentioned earlier in the beginning, our health, our culture, our spirituality. So everything that makes us who we are, every structure that we engage with impacts our well-being and our ability or lack of ability to cope within different situations may cause a person to have mental illness. But there's also a biological component to it. And so when we think about mental health, we have to consider the biology of that person. Again, history is very important. When we talk about any illness, when we talk about diabetes, we talk about hypertension, we often talk about the history. You know, is there a family history of diabetes or hypertension? We go through those things, and because of that, we are more aware of what we eat or don't eat, our stressors. We take care of those things. But from a mental perspective, from a mental health perspective, we oftentimes don't think about it. And mental health is also physical. There's also that physical component as well. So when we think about mental health, we want to think holistically about the mental well-being of a person. What are the factors that impacts a person to be able to be a productive citizen? When we talk about mental illness, are persons who may have a biological component that makes it difficult for them to be a productive citizen. And that could be for whatever. So for each diagnosis, there's different criteria that a person may need to meet for that. But it still goes down to the challenges that they may have to become a productive person, that they may need support in those different areas.
Dr. Nixon, you want to comment on this?
So thank you. They also say that there's no health without mental health. Yet most healthcare providers don't know a lot about mental wellness. Okay, so that's one of the big problems. The other thing is that in our societies, in the places I've worked, mental wellness and mental health issues still remain the whole Cinderella of the healthcare system. When we started Ruggles, 2009, soon be 20 years since you did, right? It should be 20 years since you worked on that paper, right?
Yes, 2004, 2005.
Right, so it's now 20 years. The point I'm making here is that we often tend not to give priority. And it is well known that stigma, which is one of the biggest challenges to delivering health care, mental health care, emanates from the people who give health care, even mental health care. So until we have that good balance between, we can talk about having good care in the hospital and having laws, but we also need to have a system where healthcare providers understand that that is an integrated part of healthcare delivery, mental health care. And that is, in a lot of cases, our shortcomings. We talk about preventative care. Yeah, but I'm a GP. How much of my patients' mental wellness do I consider? How many of us in primary care recognize this? How many times you turn up at a hospital? If you turn up at a hospital as a female 5 times with the same abdominal pain, it's probably not abdominal pain on its own. There are probably other situations. Like I met a young lady, recurrent backache. It turned out that she was an abused child and was beaten to the point where they almost broke her back. And I spent 15 minutes talking to her, and her pain dissipated. So unless we have a good balance between preventative care and what people get in the out of mental health services, and of course, yes, understanding history, because there are severe mental illnesses that will require confinement even for a time. We need to understand, like you said, the magnitude of illnesses, of mental illness that exist in our society. The amount of times you have people who have challenges at work, on the streets, wherever they are outside, who actually have mental illness. You have seen it in the penal system. People who are the recidivism in and out and in and out and in and out of the penal system for sometimes very simple things. And if you were to sit back, you realize, oh my goodness, this man has this problem, or that person has that mental health problem. So until we're able to inject mental health as a component of general health in all aspects of well-being of our population, we're going to continue to have this. And when we prepare the healthcare staff for dealing with it, right, and working with a certain legal framework, there must be those guidelines. Make sure the person is given fair treatment. Make sure that they're properly diagnosed. I'm supposed to know how to diagnose. I can't diagnose, send to somebody else who can. Make sure there's medications available. Make sure that you're not forced confinement. Make sure that there's communications with families. Make sure that there's support for families. Make sure that the person, and all the complications that can have. Unless we're able to create a balanced state of delivery of healthcare, which includes, importantly, mental health care, we are not really doing a very good job.
Ms. Russell, you want to come in? Because, yes.
I am a very practical person. I'm listening to what everyone is sharing here, particularly, I like Dr. Nixon's passion, and I love the way that Ms. Lopez broke down mental health, because oftentimes the moment you say mental health, you think mental illness, not realizing they're two separate things. Physical health encompasses the diseases, illnesses, symptoms, in as the same way mental health encompasses but is not limited to. I'm getting into lawyer language. And then Ruggles' passion for how hard he worked on the report that 20 years later is still waiting for any form of implementation. What it does, it takes me to this. In 2022, and this is relevant, I'm telling a story. In 2022, I started a platform called Helping Crisis 246. Now, I live in Barbados, but I'm Jamaican. But I've always practiced in Barbados. So I've been practicing for going 22 years now. Throughout the pandemic, I noticed in Barbados, I was seeing a lot of reports of suicide, which isn't normal here. At best, you might see 1 or 2 for the year, at best. But I started to notice that every couple of months, you were seeing something. And I was just like, this is odd. It hit home when 2 persons I knew, one in 21 and then the other in 22, they took their lives. And because I've had my own experiences with mental health, I kept going through my head, I could have done more. Why didn't I see the signs? Why, you go through this thing where you think you can save people where it's not always true. All right. And so I decided to start the platform called Helping Crisis 246. And the aim was to let people know where they could find resources to help cope with everyday life, because that's the problem. When you begin to reduce the talk about mental health to mental illnesses, people are quick to shrug it off and say, I don't have diabetes. I don't have hypertension. I don't have high blood, I don't have, because we think disease. So let's break that down. I don't have depression. I don't have schizophrenia. I don't have bipolar. So this doesn't apply to me, and they automatically stop listening. But they don't realize that mental health encompasses your ability to cope with life stressors. That's it. But sometimes in our big desire for the good, so whether it is we follow religion or manifestation culture or any number of things that tell us to think positive so that we can avoid bad, and you thought you were following the script properly, and then one day somebody gets cancer and you're like, no, this wasn't supposed to happen. Or you were working really hard at that job for a boss who is never satisfied, and you never get that promotion, and 10 years later, 1 million graduations missed, a whole bunch of sacrifices, and you feel a shell of yourself, and you begin to say, why am I feeling off center? Or why do I begin to feel like I don't recognize myself? But the world says to you, but you're making money. You're doing good at your job. You don't have no serious health issue. What you complaining about? Because we've reduced the talk about mental health to an illness. So if you're not having an illness, nothing's wrong with you. And so what people do is they suffer in silence until we see somebody in the newspaper or a loved one, and they're no longer here. And we say, but they seem fine. They're not talking because we're not giving them the ability to talk. And when I started that Helping Crisis 246 platform, what I did not expect is that people would start to single me out, which in itself talks about the stigma. And you heard, oh, you this mental health thing, you sure you okay? Excuse me? I had a client say to me once, a client who was rude and ridiculous. And I said, you know what? Come back for your file. Come back for your file. I'm going to refund you everything you've paid me, even though I've finished the work. And you know what the client said? I always knew you were crazy. From the time I saw that Helping Crisis thing you're doing, are you having a moment? Are you having a moment? And so people started trying to use it negatively against me, despite the fact that what I was trying to do is to get into a space that said, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay not to know how to cope. And here is how you can learn how to. You don't have to wait till you are depressed or suicidal or bipolar or have a diagnosis. From the time you realize you or your loved one are struggling, you feel off-center, you don't recognize yourself, you don't know what to do anymore, you are feeling a ton of dissatisfaction with your life, like the Whitney Houstons and the Michael Jacksons, where we say they had it all. What happened? But when there's no safe space to talk about just the things that you're ruminating on, and every time you open your mouth, you have people who are throwing it in your face, like what was happening to me, you begin to say, you see me? I must stay silent. And I'm going to play the game and pretend away. I'm going to give into avoidance. I'm going to busy myself. And I'm going to end on this because I know I can't belong with these things. I practice 99% of employment law. And there's nothing that irks me more than when an employer says to me, my employee needs to learn to leave the stuff at home. Leave it out of the office. And I keep saying we are whole humans. You cannot expect someone who is going through a divorce to show up as the most productive, focused employee. You cannot expect that someone who has just lost a loved one and you give 2 days of bereavement leave, if you're lucky, to somehow turn up on day 3 as if nobody died and they didn't just come from a funeral and they're not digging through things of a loved one while dealing with the grief of that and still deliver on deadline. Because we are whole human beings where every single part of us spills over into the other. So I'm going to go back to the use of the language with Miss Lopez when she talked about productive members of society. If you want to ensure we are productive members of society, find out what the whole of us is going through and find ways to tend to every one of those areas. So we have the doctor we can go to for physical health. We have the schools we can go to for learning, but we all don't come from good support systems and family systems that are there to help us emotionally. And I will always remember something I read sometime last year where it says there was a study done. I don't want to go into too much, but it said the single greatest deciding factor in how well somebody copes in stress is not therapy and it's not medication. It is the strength of their support system. Now imagine if we started to teach that at a community and family level and we understood that being each other's support is the thing that can help to make or break us. Then all of a sudden mental health doesn't take a backseat. All of a sudden when someone is off, we don't send them into confinement. We don't send them for a diagnosis. We say, how can I help? And when we have people like Miss Lopez and others who are teaching, how do you cope and how do you help those who need to cope? Then we have more productive workers. We have better politicians. We have a better community and society as a whole. So that mental health is really the undercurrent of society and human existence in my. And I will stop there.
Aisha, you want to come in?
Yes, well, I'm certainly grateful for the conversation so far. I love that the panel is so passionate about the topic at hand this evening. One of the questions that comes to my head automatically based on everything that has been said thus far is education. I do believe that we are lacking education in the Caribbean generally with respect to mental health and well-being on a whole. So I would like to hear from the guests before us. What is it that you think we can do, not only as members of society, but also in particular areas, say teachers at schools? We also have the regular person on the road. What can we do in order to assist persons to understand what is happening in the mental health space?
I just want. Am I muted? Yes, I just wanted to ask Ms. Russel, before we deal with the education part, could legislation assist in any way, a regulatory framework? But I'm just wondering what could be done legislation-wise in the area of employment law to at least facilitate the things you speak about.
You see, the reality is this. Mental health, like I said, is the whole human and the whole being. So, for instance, we will legislate maternity leave, but we won't legislate bereavement leave. We will legislate, we don't have mental health days in the legislation in Barbados. There are a few countries like Canada and the US that might have some isolated laws dealing with that. And this is how we help. Because the reality is that if you leave it up to the goodness of people's hearts or the employer's heart, the employer won't always see the benefit in it, even though a happy employee is directly related to a productive employee. They are the best ones, and you reduce your turnover rate. If you want your employee to show up well, you have to help them with their well-being. It doesn't mean that you have to pamper your employer. You're responsible for their therapy and counseling. But if you can assist where that's necessary, you'd be surprised how a grateful employee, in most instances, not all, but in most instances, will show up for you in the way you need them to show up for your business. So let us get in some laws that deal with bereavement leave, that deal with mental health days that are separate and apart from sick leave. I have a pet peeve against sick leave, where in Barbados, sick leave is not legislated, only the benefits under like the national insurance scheme. But most companies, because it's at your discretion, they will give you 3 unpaid sick days per year. What that does is that employees have to split three paid sick days per year. They split it out with the children, and children are always getting sick. You run out of those paid days quickly. So you know what you do? You turn up at work sick. And when you turn up at work sick, your mental, the part of you that is bearing pain and bearing symptoms versus focusing, they're all limited, so that your mental health in that moment is on the decline. You're not doing your best. So we need legislated sick leave that gives a minimum number of paid days so people don't have to force themselves to work. We need to have interventions like the Safety and Health at Work Act we have here. We have a professor doing Devonish who for a long time has been lobbying that the Safety and Health at Work Act should include provisions that deal with employee mental health and even how to deal with crises that happen. I had an employer call me the other day about an employee who literally had a breakdown at work and wanted to know how to discipline. I said, the employee is having a breakdown. This is not a moment for discipline, nor am I asking you to play psychologist. I am asking you to put down the ruler, to put down the stick, and to address this from the human level of the emotional breakdown this employee is experiencing. And if we had more resources that employers could turn to, that, I don't know, it could be a medical facility, they don't refer these things there, you'd be surprised that some people are not fired as easily over what might just really be under its current mental health issues. So I do believe legislation can help. There are many, many ways, many ways.
And what's about trade unions in terms of their agreements with employers and so? Do you think there's also room for that?
It's collective bargaining. I cannot see how a reasonable trade union would not want this. The problem with Barbados is that the trade union movement is still on the voluntary system, where the employer doesn't even have to recognize you. You're supposed to get 50+1 before you are recognized, and even then they can have enforcement issues. So that doing it via the collective bargaining unit will only help for those larger organizations where it's significantly unionized, but for the smaller ones, it really won't get you the kind of intervention you need. But I do believe educating employers on the correlation between an employee's mental well-being and their productivity and profitability is probably the thing that will get most employers to do it voluntarily.
Okay. The education one that Aisha raised, anybody want to take it up? Deshane?
All right, I'll take it up, and I'll just add to what Ms. Michelle talked about the employer's part. So because I provide employee assistance programs, part of what I've been doing is educating managers and supervisors in terms of the benefit that they would get. So even though it's not within the legal system, by them taking that initiative, it's helping them holistically. So promoting in terms of educating them how taking care of an employee, because growing up we often heard leave our problems at the door. But that means you have a lot of fragmented people within the workspace, within the school space, because like Ms. Michelle rightfully said, our mental health, our mental well-being is the blueprint of society, right? So if we are leaving parts of us at some door, we're not fully 100% there. But when we invite our whole self in, and even the parts that are having challenges, right? Because when we are in a space of shame, it doesn't do well for us at all. And so when we are able to bring our whole self, even the parts that is struggling, and we could be graceful with that part, and being in a space where we're all graceful with it, then we could give support to that part that is struggling. So when you talk about the different aspects and if legislation will be beneficial. That is one of the first steps. But remember when I mentioned in terms of what is mental health well-being and the state and how that encompasses every different aspects of our lives, I believe it's multifaceted. That question is very, each sector of society has to also be a part of that movement because you may see progress in one area, but if progress is that's happening in another area, it lags behind, and that again still impacts how we show up. All right. So for that employer that may say, all right, we'll give mental health days, maybe 1 or 2 mental health days for the year. However, they have other strict employment requirements, then that cancel out each other, right? So it has to be really well-rounded. We want to be able to create a space that the whole
I lost her for a while.
in terms of the
Yes.
education system while doing research.
Yeah, we lost her a minute.
I could hear you guys, but I'm not seeing.
Okay, good. Rox, you wanted to come in?
Yes, okay. Well, education is important, but legislation is critical. And we need, for example, and that was one of the areas of focus in the draft act that was developed sometime in 2009, the final draft. Because if you notice, when you go to a hospital, I think we have some feedback. Is it Sonia?
Yeah.
We have some heavy feedback. Yes. The if you note, the act that governs us is a Mental Hospitals Act, for example. And what I discovered during those consultations back in 2010 or thereabout, for the mental hospital in Grenada, it was a place where mental patients lived. What happened is that there would be an issue with a mental patient, and Sonia mentioned stigma. What you really have is the family can't cope, so they bring them to the mental hospital, and you have people staying in the hospital for 30-something years and 40-something years, and it is taken that they live there. Could you imagine if somebody goes to the general hospital and 15 years later they're still in the hospital? So the act itself, as I said, focused on prevention, and the admission to the hospital would be based on particular procedures. So, for example, at your point of entry, you see a doctor and a specialist has to confirm within 14 days and so you go in and you come out, primary health care takes care of you. So that's the legislation part that is critical. So education and advocacy is important. So it has to be a collaborative, a multifaceted approach. Sonia spoke about the stigma, and that is where education is important, because there is a certain stigma attached to people who suffer from mental illness. So you still find today people talking about lunatic, people talking about mad, people talking about crazy, using those terminologies. In the new act, and that's why legislation is so important, you speak of a patient, a mental health patient. That is the language, is a patient just like anybody else who suffers from a physical condition. So all of that, because what you have a lot of talking, you have a lot of you have some advocacy, but nobody is doing what is required to transform the system. So and with that transformation would come to a different attitude and a different culture associated with mental health patients. And so so that aspect is crucial. I think it was Michelle who mentioned a strength of support system, for example, and very important points. Now, I also believe that workplaces can play and must play a critical role. So, and that workplaces, for example, don't focus on health and wellness. You know, you have people come to work, they do their work, they go home, they might fall sick from time to time. But how do you really contribute to the physical and mental health of patients? I mean, I can speak on that too, because in our chambers, we introduced in about 2012 a health and wellness club. And it's really a health and wellness program where it's not as functional as the way it started off, but the concept is still there. Where as a workplace, we did health talks, for example, every month, every second Tuesday in the month, there was a health talk. A health professional from different areas, even alternative medicine, will come in and speak. Every Thursday, there was a health walk. Every Saturday, every third Saturday in the month, there was a longer health walk, exploring the countryside and so. Then you will have health breakfast. These concepts. And what you found with that is the inter-staff relationship, one, improved significantly, and people changed their diet significantly. Because they are learning. And again, education, not just in a vacuum, but you have support systems. And I think that's something trade unions should advocate for, because that is big now. Health and wellness, whether in the workplace or in communities. So you have to decentralize it, because we don't have the resources. When the mental hospital is filled with tenants, for example, where do the new mental patients go? It becomes overcrowded at the end of the day. So we have to decentralize, and the idea under the new system was to let the primary healthcare officials based in the communities throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, they will have a database and know in each parish every individual that suffered from a mental condition. And we have technology now. And part of the program is to ensure that these people take their medication and they live normal lives. What happens now is that we wait until somebody flare up, becomes violent, and then the way the police, and they call the police now, not a mental health expert team. I think in Jamaica, there are special teams that deal with these violent mental health patients. But if you call the police not trained to deal with it. So a man is behaving violently, he's threatening life and limb, and therefore you shoot him. And sometimes these people are shot dead. Whereas if people are trained to deal with it, then you can have somebody alive saved. And as I think it was Michelle also mentioned, You know, it's not about people who suffer from mental illness, just as those who suffer from physical illness. They are productive or can be productive members of society. But when you write them off and you say, well, they're mad and they're this and that, nobody wants to employ them. Everybody is scared of them. And so it's really an approach. And, you know, I believe in public education. I'm passionate about public education. But education alone, if we don't have that legislative infrastructure, would not cut it. Because we'll be talking about mental health and everything, and then our laws remain talking about lunatics and criminal lunatics and pauper lunatics. Yes.
Rox, let me ask you, given the fact that we deal with a cultural issue in terms of the stigma and all of those things, is there any room, and I don't know if there's any provision in the laws that were drafted on issues of A, privacy, and B, discrimination?
Yes, key privacy, discrimination, and very importantly, there was a property component to it. So what you have, people who eventually become mental patients and they have serious challenges. What you find is people take advantage of them, and they may lose properties because they don't have the mental capacity to deal with these issues. For example, in Grenada, and I think in most of the other countries, somebody has to apply for guardianship because the court is the ultimate guardian of a mental patient, and you have to apply to the court to be the guardian of such a person. But these laws seek to protect mental patients from discrimination, even, for example, the correspondence and how you handle the correspondence in the hospital, how they communicate, receive communication, and how they send out communication, the importance of privacy, just like any other individual. So as I said before, everybody is entitled to fundamental rights and freedoms, and it's not everybody minus a mental health patient. And therefore, every right that we see, quote unquote, a normal person has also applies to mental health patients. And that's why our laws lag so far behind. You know, it was just, I think it's within the last year. If it's not the last year, the last 2 years, there was a particular church, church celebrating a landmark, whether 10 or 15 years or more. So I was invited. They had a Constitution night. In fact, I was very impressed. And so I went up there and, spoke on the Constitution, and the issue of mental health came up. So I spoke about mental health, and after the session, somebody invited me to be on a committee to deal with mental health because they have these initiatives on mental health underway now. And these are senior people. So I said, a committee? Me? So I say, what's the functions of that committee? Just to get an idea. And these folks didn't know anything at all about that initiative in between 2004 and 2010. Absolutely, they never heard about it at all. So you know what we do, and you bring in expensive consultants to basically do what people do already. And you have the reports there. And that is why, as I say, you need advocates to transform these ideas into to implement these ideas, to move it from where it is to really implement it. That is what we need. Because if we don't have those changes, and I really must take the opportunity to commend Dr. Spence, for example. He does a fantastic job, like a one-man army in relation to mental patients, raising funds. I think there's a group too, Friends for the Mentally Ill. They raise funds, they advocate. I'm frequently invited to give talks in relation to the law but that too, we have to go further than that. And in 2025. But that is not to say that, because I believe it will happen with consistent, persistent advocacy. You know, it is mental health and the need to, respect the marginalized. Because as they say, you are judged on how you treat. Society is judged on how you treat the marginalized in your society, how you treat them. And the mental health patients who, people who go through the, periods of challenge. What do? We wait until they become violent and then we exact violence on them. And that's the end of the story. We cannot have that kind of society in 2025.
Okay, I know Michelle has to leave. You still are. So I don't know if you want to take the opportunity, Michelle, or are you going to remain on?
I will stay a little longer, but you'll see me like wave when I'm disappearing.
Okay, good. Yes. And so I don't know if you wanted to come in there.
I think Dr. Nixon had something to
yes,
share.
okay. Yes, Sonia, come in, please. Dr. Nixon.
So I wanted to extend on what Ruggles said about education, and it's really very important. But I think it's such a closed circuit that all stakeholders have to be in all of this. There are a couple initiatives that occur in our community, in our society in Grenada, aimed at breaking down the stigma, improving education, information. For example, when I worked in the ministry, one of the things we did was kind of put on the police's training curricula the whole issue of mental health first aid. And there was a module that was developed so that the police actually were police who were trained to help to contain, to take to care those persons who are so physically uncontrolled without creating, harm to either captive or captor. But when you have a shortage of staff, you always have people working in other areas. And that there was actually a request for the police to reinstate that, at least to train other people. If actually people in training school are trained to help to understand and to contain and help to take severely mentally ill. That's why people who are violent, okay? Patients to the healthcare services. It is something that is very required, okay? Very, very necessary because people are afraid. The truth is that we don't know, and again, basic education, that mentally ill people often are more victims of violence than we are, than they cause injury to other people. They often are more victims. You chase them in town, you throw stones after them, you abuse them, blah, blah, blah. They're the victims when we are. The other thing that they have that they actually use a lot here, I know they've had it among the teachers, I know they've had it among police, I think we're going to do it with nurses, the whole mental health first aid program. That is something that everybody should do, especially people who manage large groups of people, because you see the challenges. And the people who have done it tell you, they see the whole big difference. Now they understand mental illness from a different standpoint and are actually a little more tolerant. But when we develop a legislative framework, it must be something that has the education to go with it. And it's not only the people out there, the John public, who needs to learn. We as healthcare providers, we as physicians, I have colleagues who would not see mentally ill patients. No, you want to see them, go ahead. Okay? So we have to understand that physicians and nurses and people who give direct care must also be trained. We don't get any big set of mental health training when you go to medical school or nursing school. No, we don't. Right? And then we come and we find 1 in 10 persons, if it's 1 billion out of 9 billion, that's more than 10%, okay? 1 in 10 persons, a little more than that, have some form of mental illness. Severe forms of mental illness are probably much less than the everyday. So we have to figure out, how do we train everybody who has direct contact with the public to understand what is mental illness, when to de-escalate situations. Should I be the one de-escalating? How do I do? I turn my back. What do I do? Education is going to have to be around the world, but there must be that legal framework that says, here's the person's right, here's where they must be detained, here is this section on the law that which you're going to be detained, and that there must be sufficient, because part of the problem why we have people with mental illness not being taken care of, apart from the fact that they hide it because they don't want people to know. We don't have enough people. The bottom line, are we going to improve our services to ensure that people are there to take care of people who have mental illnesses? Especially like when you get to Monday, they say that people forget them. Another very ill person come in, you put him back, and you back up. It's almost like putting chickens in a coop, and they're like, oh my goodness, Tom has been here for 10 years. His mother hasn't come. And Tom could have gone back and done his work like a normal person. Because the basic objective of mental health care is that people are able to function at their highest potential.
Okay.
And I can have a breakdown, but I can go back and work.
Yeah, I just want to, all right, Sonia, I just want to recognize the sponsors before I come up with a specific question to Deshane. Well, in fact, 2 questions. Gel Professional Solutions, Inc., Gem FM carried this program on FM radio out of Canada, and Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, G-Town.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Yes, but my question to Deshane, and after that we'll take some comments from the chat, is aging and mental health, A, and B, if there are any professions which members are disposed towards mental health disorders. You're muted.
I'll start off with the profession first, because that's an easier response than aging. In terms of profession, who are more predisposed? Persons who are first responders are typically more at risk because they get to see the raw experiences that people are having. So, for example, police officers, medical officers, EMT, persons that works within the medical field, the forefront. But I also think when I think about attorneys, I also think attorneys also experience vicarious trauma because of the client base that you may have, depending on where you get to hear the backstory of person's experiences. And especially because we know that mental illness as such still has so much stigma and shame that when you are working with persons, you may hear more than they would tell their friends. The attorneys have that privilege, so you get to hear a lot of those things. So when we think about professions, I think our profession have the capacity to experience mental health just because we're oftentimes interfaced with persons, but persons who oftentimes have people that interact in terms of their physical component, so accidents, etc. But I also think, for example, teachers, we've been finding out more now that teachers also experience vicarious trauma. And that makes it difficult sometimes for them within the classroom, because when they have traumatized children come in and they're traumatized too, it makes the classroom environment even more difficult to process. It's not just having the children to sit down. So I think it's that question is very loaded when we start to understand more about mental health, and that change from before when we used to think that mental health is just black and white, it's either this or that. When we know now that it's more multifaceted, when we talk about the different aspects of our lives that plays a role in mental health, it's kind of hard to just narrow it down, because then when we narrow it down, we miss a large component of persons. And I think each profession that we have, because we're dealing with people, because of the dynamics, because we're human beings and we're dynamic beings, it's kind of hard to pinpoint. But what I would say is that whenever you're interacting with people, notice what is happening with your body, right? In terms of what that experience is like, your exhaustion level, your changes in your sleeping, your appetite, what is happening to you? Because sometimes it may not be big traumas or big experiences that you may notice, and you may say, well, I don't have these things, right? We may check out, I don't have clinical depression, or I don't have this diagnosis. But what is that happening to you that is impacting you? Because then that creates, in terms of, I like to talk about depression. Sometimes we could function, and as a culture, as a Caribbean, we have so many different traumas that we could work in difficult environments. We could still excel in certain aspects, even though we hold so many different pains. And so depression will look different for us. So a lot of the time, a lot of what we talk about when we talk about mental illness, for example, even in our discussion that we've been having, we're talking about the severe cases. We're not talking about the day-to-day person that may experience these things. And I think that also plays a huge role in terms of, we have an image of what mental illness looks like. But at the same day, on a day-to-day basis, our interaction with people really and truly plays a role. So we're all have that predisposition that we could be impacted by having a mental illness. How it manifests will look different. The level of severity will be different. Right? And as we talk about age and mental health, because developmentally it changes, right? Different trajectory. Our needs are still going to be similar as we age. It will look different as we age. So, for example, the first 5 years of life, we need our parents or social support system to be able to provide social engagement, to be able to feel like I am safe, I am loved, and your basic needs are met, and social interactions. That continues into pre-adolescent and adolescent ages. Those needs are the same, but they may look different. So as you reach in that pre-adolescent, adolescent stages, we look at peers more. So the focus may be a lot different. We're looking at our peer engagement, but we still need to have our basic needs met. We still need to be known that we're safe and we're loved. And that happens as we become adults as well, right? So even in our different workspaces, our social, our church or religious beliefs, in our academic ventures, and all of those things, the needs are still the same. What tends to happen as we age older into seniority, there is a reflection in terms of, what have I accomplished? How have I been a productive person in society? What were some of my needs? So what I've seen a lot with the aging adults and the aging population is, when they reach that point of reflecting in terms of how they have contributed to society, or some of the things that they did not do, when they look at the lens from, had I known what I know now, we see a lot more of depression, even when they're starting to, when they may experience, for example, pre-dementia symptoms, when when they start to have cognitive decline and they go back to different points, and I call those trauma points or memory points that was very important for them within their lives, that starts to impact them in terms of now they're almost in that two spaces, those younger experiences apart from where they are now. So when it comes to aging and mental health, persons experience mental health challenges throughout. They have mental health well-being throughout. But I think when we think about aging, and I'm not sure how much you wanted me to talk about aging, but different parts of our lives, there is a desire to be loved, to feel safe, to know that we're okay, to be able to be a part where we could actually be true to ourselves. And that's why the workspaces that allows us to show up as we are with our lights and encourage our strength, we feel more productive and we feel more present in society because we don't feel like we have to bring parts of ourselves. And what I see in older persons is they ruminate in things that they could have done better, what they have learned. They tell stories. There is a lot more storytelling with persons as they age because their lessons learned is what they want to impart now. So I think I enjoy working with older population at times because what I could hear, the sadness sometimes that they're experiencing is that reflective lens that they bring to the table that I think sometimes we don't create that space again where the elderly impart their experiences to share. Even if we look at it from a community base, so we talked about shifting from institutionalization to that community base, right? Even using our elderly in terms of how do we talk about health and well-being, and how do we create a system where we could talk about our emotions and creating that space. I think when I think about aging, for some reason, elderly always come to mind. But again, you notice that is also the schema that I'm using, that I hear aging and I automatically think the elderly. So again, the languages that we use also create the word, also create our realities, right? What we pay attention to.
Why I ask, and then the lawyers will come in there now. It is because of the in terms of their decision making, as you get older, to what extent, generally speaking, I know there'll always be outliers. Yeah. My father is 102 almost, and he has the best memory in the family. So he's an outlier. But generally speaking, would you say that given that aging process, when somebody life expectancy, I think now is 72 for men in Grenada, 75 for women, would you say when people pass that average life expectancy in terms of their decision making, in particular with decisions they make with regard to their property, who they will leave it for, who they want to make decisions on their behalf. For example, they have some kind of crisis. Would you say that there is a deterioration in that decision-making process, which requires that the law give them some special protection so that they will not be taken advantage of? I don't know if I make myself clear.
Okay, so what I'm hearing from that is in terms of once a person reaches a particular age, should there be some provision in place to ensure that they are not taken advantage of? And what I would like
indeed.
Okay, what I would like to encourage people is that if you have sometimes because of the aging process, and remember, if you've made a will or a wish early on, there were certain things that you weren't aware of, and as you become older and reflect back, you may decide to make a decision to change your initial plan. But sometimes because we hear these stories in terms of, well, the land will be divided this way, etc. It creates a fixed perception that this is what it's going to be when our elderly person passed away. You may see that they may have some changes after a while, and sometimes we automatically think, well, they're cognitive decline. It does not necessarily mean that. You could reach 72 And cognitively, there hasn't been much of a decline that would impact your decision. There are assessments that could be done in terms of to assess in terms of that person's cognitive capacity, because aging does not automatically mean that you have cognitive decline and you can't make decisions. I think when it comes to the legal aspect is having that assessed so that you could know, because when a person age, they can still think, they can still make decisions. I think the concern is when they reach a point where they're already exhibiting, when their cognitive decline is severe, that is impacting their ability to make decisions. At that point, then I feel like there should be provision within that space. So I think probably what could be done is when they're making changes for their will or their property at older ages, to have that there, have an assessment there to assess and create a baseline in terms of their cognitive abilities, so that that is not questioned as they continue to decline. Because I know sometimes that's become the challenges in terms of the legal aspect in terms of that person. But it does not necessarily mean because of their age that their decision is or shouldn't be respected. I think if there is no evidence that the decline is there, then Dr. Sonia?
And I agree with you. I also want us to remember that that whole issue of capacity to make decision is taken along the whole lifespan. So a 5-year-old can decide he's not taking his vaccine, but his mother can say no, right? A 21-year-old can make decisions to get married if he's mentally well. Let's say you have a 21-year-old who is psychotic. Can you make a decision as to whether or not he's going to be admitted? Because you would like people to be admitted to a mental health facility if they're unwell voluntarily, right? Does the law cover for that? Those are things you have to consider along the lifespan. When is it that a person doesn't have capacity to make a decision? And I'm sure Ruggles would have approached that topic, the whole issue of voluntary confinement to a mental hospital. Often people are not able to do it. Who has the capacity to do it? Right? Those are the things we have to take into consideration. So it's not just being old, because I have 98-year-olds who can twist me around their fingers, and then I have 60-year-olds who really need somebody to make a decision for them. So it is a question of not just aging, but observation and having the wherewithal. Whether we're going to have mood and memory clinics, whether we're going to have psychologists or psychiatrists, we're going to have forensic psychiatrists who evaluate somebody, whatever it is. So that all of those things will fall into the framework of how do we effectively ensure that people's mental health doesn't affect or affects with positivity towards them, their capacity to make decisions for themselves along the life.
I think the question is whether, and if Ruggles and Michelle could address it, whether at a particular point in time in that life cycle, there should be a presumption that, there is a presumption, for example, that a child below the age of 8 can't do certain things. You can have criminal intent. Yeah, there's a presumption with regard to somebody who is 12, but you can rebut it. Yeah, whether with regard to certain decisions at the other end of the cycle, there should be certain presumptions, but rebuttable. So, for example,
I think we're gonna have to look at statistics. Remember, our law is the 19th century law, right? I just say X can do Y, but we need to look and see what the general population, how the general population can respond to decision making for themselves, for their own well-being. I don't think you can say from 60 years old. I know for driving, for example, after you're 75, you have to be reevaluated, right? Because they know that the statistics show that people over 75 may have challenges. I have patients who are 70 years and said, you can't drive anymore. I will not allow you to drive anymore because they can't manage, right? But I don't know if you can say that without going into looking at the data overall as to within our population who's unable to make decisions or where we see decline. I think it has to do with observing clearly, and that's also falls within the responsibility of the legal profession. Is Mr. James giving me the information I need? Maybe he should do X, Y, Z. Maybe you should set up little questionnaires that could decide whether or not he needs to go for further evaluation from a mental health standpoint. But I think it has to do also with observation of the person. I don't know what given a time, unless we have numbers to go by.
Yes, I agree with Dr. Nixon in terms of putting a time makes it very difficult because you have to be able to see that person's ability to still function, their functionality. So and each person will be different, right? So even if we do look at the number, we have to look at the individual that we are trying to apply this to, because it will be different again in terms of their functionality, their ability to still engage in their adaptive functioning skills, that they can still function within their capacity, that their conversation, like, their mobility, it has so many different aspects that age alone is only one aspect of that person. So if we use it primarily on just their age, then what we're doing is we could be infringing people's human rights, right? So we have to be able to look at it. You're muted, Dr. Nixon.
Yeah, Aisha?
Okay, thank you all so much. Before we continue, I just wanted to take some questions from the chat. I really would have wanted to take these questions before Michelle left because they're particularly pointed to the attorneys. But Mr. Ferguson, I'm sure you can assist with this. And Ms. Lopez and Dr. Nixon as well. There's a question here. It says from Martin Felix. He says, in the USA, there's a diagnostic and statistical manual, DSM, which is updated from time to time, which is the criteria for determining mental disorders. What criteria is used to determine mental disorders? He asks in Grenada. So Dr. Nixon, I don't know if you could speak to the Grenada experience, and perhaps Ms. Lopez, you could speak to your locality.
Well, the DSM-5 is where we are now, right? And that's the mental health Bible, isn't it? It has all of that. It's universal. So that's what I know. As far as I know in Grenada, DSM-5 is the same.
That's what is used as well in Grenada. Okay. And
right, Ms. Gutierrez, that's what you use?
The DSM-5, DSM-5-TR is the latest one, which is only minor changes within the DSM-5. So it's not much.
Yes.
So we use the DSM as they change within the Caribbean as well. And we just use the Caribbean lens in terms of how it manifests, right? Because we have to have that cultural humility. Some of the things of how it's described or the examples that they gave may be based on the US. But as clinicians, we are trained in terms of how do we use our Caribbean lens to be able to make diagnosis.
Thank you both so much. So Martin, I hope that answers your question. We also have a question from Mr. I think is Duendel Gilbert. His question is, he starts, good night, Mr. Ferguson. We've seen courts handle matters of assault, theft, and defamation with clear legal footing. But when the injury is to the mind silent, unseen, how do we ensure the law does not remain blind to it? In your view, is the Caribbean legal system evolving quickly enough to meaningfully address mental health as a factor in criminal and civil responsibility?
Well, the straight answer is no. And that is where, again, you need urgent, you need reform. You see, we need more activists. We need more advocates who push for change. So, we dealt with the general legislation in terms of mental health, a Mental Health Act. But at the legal system, for example, and the person Wendell who raised the question, at the legal system, there's not much consideration given to mental health. One, I remember doing a murder trial several years ago, probably close to 20 years ago. There was this murder accused. It was a state brief. And in my first 10 minutes of speaking with him, interacting, I realized he had a mental challenge. There was a colleague with me too, who we both realized that he had a mental challenge. It was a state brief. The trial is coming up, and I I even use now, I say, well, listen, I have to get a mental assessment of this guy before we go to trial. I used my own resources. So I contacted a mental health expert to do an assessment. He did an assessment and sent a 2-paragraph report basically saying the guy is fit to stand trial. No, the medical expert says the guy is fit to stand trial, and that he really doesn't have, from his assessment. Now I'm saying from my layman assessment, I didn't even need 10 minutes. But ultimately, that matter was completed. He was found guilty, and the appellate process started. And we then sought, because I was convinced that he had mental issues. So we got experts, right? In fact, from the United Kingdom, because there's a group of experts there connected with dealing with a lot of these criminal matters. And through contacts there, we were able to get a clinical psychologist and a psychiatrist to come down as part of the appellate process. And they both did independent reports. And these reports, neither report was less than 30 pages of analysis, and concluded, as I knew all along, that the guy had serious mental problems. Now, so the infrastructure, even the kind of expertise to deal with these matters for mental patients before the court, people who have mental challenges, we don't have it. The law does not provide for it. One. Secondly, we have a situation where so that deals with even the trial of mental patients. And people, at times, you do a procedure here to determine mental capacity. But if somebody now is found guilty, where is that person sent? In the prison. There seems to be an earthquake. It seems. I'm not too sure. But
I will tell the
oh, okay. The mental at the stage of punishment, these people found guilty are sent to the prison to be with everybody else in the prison, because we don't have the facilities to do otherwise. And that is not factored in. This is something that has been spoken about for years. So you have that problem. Absolutely no provision made for it. Our laws are a cake in this regard. And then now you have the issue of the mental people who have mental challenges commit criminal offenses. And in some countries they have what you call diminished responsibility. So somebody goes and commits an offense, and it's obvious that at the time that offense committed, the individual was not the master of his or her own mind. And for the countries that have diminished responsibility, you then plead guilty. plead guilty, but diminish responsibility under that section, and the accused is treated accordingly. In our system, there's no provision for diminished responsibility, and
Maybe in
therefore, if you
Grenada.
have to, yeah, in Grenada,
I think they have diminished responsibility sentence.
yeah, and St. Lucia, I think there is
Yes,
diminished. Yeah, in several. I'm speaking about Grenada, particularly
yes.
here.
Yeah.
And this is something that has been again pushed because we had several. I even brought a constitutional matter in relation to it. Well, we drew it early because again, my guy clear as everything points to, the crime was committed when he was not the master of his mind. And but the only provision you have is guilty of murder. No, murder carries with it murder, the killing and the intention to kill. You see, in law, in every criminal matter, there are two elements that you prove in order to establish the guilt of an individual. One, the actus reus, or the act itself, whether by shooting, chopping, whatever. And two, the mens rea, which is an intent to commit the crime. There must be an intent to do so. No, somebody who clearly does not have mental capacity at the material time, then how do you treat it? You treat it, do you treat that the same as somebody who has full capacity committing a criminal offense? But there's no distinction. There are no distinctions in our laws. And there was a particular matter. I was quite disappointed with the appellate ruling on it because it's treated with the guy as though he was a normal person and talking about sending a message to society. You send a message to society when somebody has essentially a mental disability. So the reality, unfortunately, is no, because again, we do not recognize it as a society. We do not recognize mental illness as an illness. We don't recognize it as you have physical, and that's where really the education comes in. But that is where too, because you can talk about this till thy kingdom come. If no provisions are made legislatively, then we hardly going anywhere, because we'll be saying the same thing over and over and over again with no change.
I think there's a next question, Aisha.
I want to ask something. Before we go, I'm going to ask Ruggs something. So Ruggs, in relation to that, and not having, we don't have any parameters within which work from a legal standpoint. Who's responsible? Does that come according to the will of the leadership? I don't know. Who has to take it? Because I remember talking about when I first came back to Grenada, us having, you remember that guy that killed the lady on the beach and had in Las Vegas, I think, and he had a similar problem just before, and he was deemed incompetent. How do we set up the law, both the common law and the health component of the law, to ensure that one, that they overlap and they agree, and two, that those cases are dealt with and that people get justice either way, that a guy gets a fair treatment, whoever the person is gets a fair trial, and that the people who are victims or deserve some whatever compensation is due, right? Whatever, that they also get the best outcome for whatever the circumstances are. Because unless I think it's going to have to come from the top, that they understand, and of course maybe advocacy is what's going to make it happen, but unless it comes from the top that, listen, we have all this recidivism, and we know, let me tell you what the statistics show, that most of the people who commit severe crime, for example, do it out of a normal mental state. As you can, the US statistics show probably 60% of the people who go into the penal system, 60% of people actually have mental health issues that have been undiagnosed or unresolved. So it means that we have to have a system that balances with our general criminal system, right? To ensure that we figure out what's going on, why people are committing crimes, why they're doing whatever extreme acts they do, and where do we put them? Do we have, where do we put somebody who, recidivism, where are they put? Do you put them into a Richmond Hill? Do you put them into Mount Gay? You put them in Mount Gay among the ordinary people? Do you understand what I'm saying? So we have to define well.
Yes, the time running and Rob, just confirm, yes, there was an earthquake.
Yes, there was.
Yes, I felt it.
Aisha, you could just take the last question, I think. One more.
The last question that we have is from Cyrus Griffith, and Cyrus asks, what defense does a mentally unstable person have in criminal law if they can be proven that the individual goes regularly? I think he's asking if it can be proven that the individual is regularly has mental health.
Goes regularly to the mental hospital, I guess.
Yes, I didn't hear the question. Sorry.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Cyrus Griffith asks, what defense does a mentally unstable person have in criminal law if it can be proven that that individual goes regularly?
I guess regularly. To the hospital. I guess in the mental hospital.
Yes. Yes. Well, you have concepts like, guilty but insane. Again, you have, it depends on the stage. Somebody may not, for example, be fit to stand trial. And again, we have problems with, and I'm speaking about the Caribbean. Some of these folks who get arrested and charged with mental, with criminal offenses, they are just left in the prison and sometimes discovered 30 years later, they're just there, they're fitted in to the environment and become a part of the environment, but they are forgotten. And that is why, to just tie in with the question before, the legislative laws are passed by Parliament. Right? There's no other institution to pass laws but Parliament, and the legislative agenda is set by the executive, in this case, Cabinet. With different administrations, they have different legislative agenda. So it's really a matter of getting this issue, long outstanding issue, as part of the legislative agenda. And there are several experienced people now who are out of the system, but I'm sure would be able to play a critical role in transformation as far as that is concerned. But we need to reflect it as part of our laws, because what happens when these people come to court, the hands of the magistrate is tied. The hands of the judges are tied. At the end, what do? They have to use their discretion and do what they think is the best decision, because you don't have the legislative support. We should not be, as a society, not have diminished responsibility as part of our laws. But again, you can only talk so much. But the people who have to make it happen, the policymakers and the lawmakers. The policymakers being the executive, the lawmakers being Parliament.
Okay. Aisha, you have a follow-up question?
Not particularly in relation to that. So that's the end of the questions within the comment section. So thank you so much, Mr. Ferguson, for answering.
Yes. And I mentioned Spence I in this, Friends of the Mentally Ill, because that's the sort of main group I know. And I should also mention Sorana Mitchell. She has been doing a lot of education, work, public education, sensitization on mental patients, and I think it's really fitting. I mentioned Spence to mention, to single her out as one who has really been doing outstanding work. And I think it's programs like these and other programs that can bring further force and weight to the issue, attention to the issue, and ultimately, hopefully, we see some change.
Yep. Okay, so we're going to end soon. But before we end again, once more, we want to just recognize the sponsors of the program. In particular, GEL Professional Solutions Inc., GMFM out of Canada, and also Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, GTAU.
Attention all workers, your health and safety at work are critical. At Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union, we are dedicated to ensuring you have a safe and secure work environment. If you encounter unsafe conditions or are involved in an accident, take immediate actions. Report it to the company, your shop steward, and make sure it reaches your union. Your health and safety is a priority, and a strong union means a strong voice for your rights. Don't wait. Address concerns right away and protect your well-being. For a safer workplace and a better quality of life, stand with the Grenada Technical and Allied Workers Union. Together, we can create a safer, healthier work environment for everyone.
Martha Belma is saying we need in Grenada, what we need in Grenada is patients advocates, giving a family member or next of kin the right to advocate on the patient's behalf, since some patients are not always treated fairly. But I guess the law provides for guardianship, but that's a process. And I just want to say that I was just listening to the ad once again from GTAU, and I just want to invite both Dr. Nixon and Deshane before we end, just to comment in terms of mental health wellness, how it contributes to a safe and healthy workplace. Deshane, we take you first.
For every dollar invested in employee well-being, employers gain 3 to 5 times more. So it is really an investment when you invest in your employees' well-being. And when we talk about employees' well-being, it's not just what the law provides in terms of sometimes people only provide the bare minimum. That is the minimum standard. But when you invest in your employees, you really get, if you want your business to be successful, your human resources is your best asset. And so when you invest in your human resources, when you assist in terms of creating a workplace where we could talk about mental illness as well as we promote mental well-being, whether that is encouraging staff to take their lunch breaks, whether that is encouraging staff to take their 15-minute morning and afternoon break, and not only promote or only celebrate persons that are overworked, because a lot of times people who get these awards are persons that are overworking themselves. And that is also not a healthy workforce when you have people that we're only celebrating those who are over exceeding what they're supposed to. Because what we're promoting unintentionally is, I want you only succeed if you're doing above and beyond, but above and beyond hurt our communities, because above and beyond means that we deprive our homes. That means we go home tired. That means that when we leave our workspace, we still go to other spaces with work in mind, that we don't have time to be fully present within those spaces. So I'm encouraging organizations to think about the culture that you're creating at work. What are you promoting? What are you rewarding? So that you create a space whereby employees could also feel that, you know what, work is work, but I also have the capacity to be in other spaces and be fully in those spaces as well. Because when we talk about mental well-being, we want to look at the person holistically. And so we look at a person holistically by looking about the other needs that they may have apart from working and apart from making finances to be able to sustain themselves. They also need to think about their family dynamics. They also think about their social component. We have to think about the space and time to be in their spiritual, whatever spirituality that they may have, so that 10 years or 20 years from now, we don't only say, well, they're successful because they had the job, they had the education. But what is their family life like? You know, so we want to be able that when people continue to age and progress, they feel good about the different aspects of their lives. So I'm imploring on employees, this is Mental Health Awareness Month, and this really is a time to put things into action. It's an awareness so that we move from just having the conversation, but what are we doing as an organization to promote well-being? How are we encouraging our staff to not leave their emotions or their troubles at the door, but how do they come holistically within the workspace? What within the workspace you could create in terms of making it be a little bit more conducive to work? You know, being in a space where your supervisors, the culture of it really encourage you to, hey, come to work, but also if you're not in a good health space, it's okay to say that I need support. Do you have an employee assistant program whereby there's therapy that is being offered? Whether you may have a financial advisor, so if you're experiencing financial distress, that could help you walk through in terms of finances, right? Because that's also something that is very important. And we don't talk about finances, but that affects us in everything that we do. That affects our mental health. Do we have someone to help us guide through that process? And we may say that, well, that's completely different from mental health, but it's not. It's a part of that process. So I'm encouraging employers in terms of start to think about your employee manual, see what you have that is promoting mental well-being or what is missing or what you could have to make it a little bit more inclusive, because you want your staff to feel good so that it helps you in the long term because your revenue improves, but also your retention of your staff will also be there because they will want to stay in a workspace that is conducive for them to grow. And they will tell their people who they know have the skills to help your company grow that, hey, this is a good workspace to be. So I am ending off with encouraging employers to really invest in your employees' mental well-being.
Thank you so much. Sonia? And you're muted. You have to unmute.
So if I touch this thing too hard, it comes back. Thank you, Deshane. Look, 100 and something years is too late, okay? It's time we get going and have a very modern mental health act that not only protects our entire population, but promotes mental well-being, that allows for recuperation and re-engagement and family completeness and all that is required when somebody gets mentally ill. Like we said, you had diabetes, you go to hospital, get treated, you go home, you go back to work if you can. Yeah, the diabetics will probably not be able to go back to work, but generally you should be able to. A system that also allows for education and trust building, because I think trust is one of the challenges we have. That is why stigma becomes a problem. A complete and a comprehensive and a fairly developed mental health act, we would not have the experiences that Louise Langdon Little had. That was the mother of Malcolm X.
Yeah.
We would not have that experience because she would get into a system that's fair, that has equity, that allows her to have the care that she requires, that allows her family to participate and to participate in the decision making in relation to her health. That should be recognized as a woman to have a little extra challenges when it comes to being able, because she might have more responsibility. She might have other biological factors that will enhance her illness. That she would have had a workspace with an EAP and employer assistance program that would have recognized. That she may have been recognized when she went to have a baby that something was wrong. That in her antenatal care, there would be the talk of pre-delivery stress, post-delivery stress, post-delivery depression, because we've known of women that have postpartum depression to have killed their children. So a system that allows that all of the information can be shared normally, as without prejudice, without putting colors on people, right? So that our mental health system becomes something of equity, something that everybody has access to, and something that people feel free to access, and that they're treated fairly, especially when it comes to imposing the law and any decision to be made. I look forward to us having forensic services where, one, our people are examined, one, they get into jail, there's a facility for them being examined, and if they have extreme problems, that they can be dealt with as all citizens require. And thank you for having me, and thank you, my colleagues who are on tonight.
Okay, then. Yeah, perhaps.
Okay, well, just briefly to say that this mental health, this being Mental Health Month, I think it's a good opportunity to make a call yet again for the for new mental health legislation in the country. And it does not just come with legislation alone, because you need to have the infrastructure in place, and hopefully we'll have some announcements, positive announcements coming in the not too distant future on transformation within the mental health, the area of mental health. Yes. So thank you. And I thank you, colleagues. I thought it was a very interesting, informative, engaging program.
Yes, I thought so also. Aisha?
I certainly agree with KC Ferguson and you, Miss Layne. I do think that the program was informative and timely, given that it is our Mental Health Awareness Month. I would like to thank our guests for appearing this evening. I think our audience benefited greatly from your professional insights into the mental health topic, and I look forward to speaking with you guys on another occasion, perhaps when it is that we do have a new act in place and we could critically analyze it and see where we are now at that time. So thank you all for joining us this evening.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you to the viewers, and thank you to everyone. And good night. Bye.
Okay.